the podcast is called Homesick for Lubavitch, and the question was I even home to be homesick? Because I was in the room, but I didn't understand any of those farbrengens. I learned through all the Maimarim. I mean, anyone could do it. I mean, I'm not saying this, again, for religious reasons. We went through it. 30 years is a long time. You still have plenty of time to watch all the Westerns. It's a long time. And then I realized that I wasn't even there, in a sense, because, I was there. I got video of this, but I wasn't actually there. I don't think that, my Lubavitch now is not a continuation of that.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2025. My name is Bosi Lgani, and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, I am here with Rabbi Shmuly Metzger, director, shliach, Chabad Sutton. Is that how we call it?
Yep.
Which is in Midtown, Manhattan. And we are here in post-congestion, what's it called?
Congestion pricing.
Congestion pricing. So, just so you know what I do for you guys, recording these podcasts, the links that we go through.
Appreciate that.
And like I have in the recent podcasts, to start mentioning, if you're listening to the podcast, you enjoy this podcast, if you could please subscribe and like it on YouTube and Spotify, whatever platform you're listening to. And if you'd like to participate in supporting this podcast, you can visit the website hflpodcast.com/donate. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for coming tonight, and I look forward to our discussion.
My pleasure. Too many people told me I had to come, so at some point I have no choice.
Well, thank you.
At some point I have no choice. So I know you wanted a little bit more of a pre-format, or to game out the conversation and in my style and procrastination. I didn't get to it. So let's just start from the beginning.
Okay.
Let's start from the beginning. Who are you?
Okay, so
but to be less silly.
Okay, so
describe your upbringing.
Okay, so for the benefit of your listeners and your subscribers, I'm part of a generation. Okay, so there's my personal story, but my generation is my class, and my generation is post Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and the Tzivos Hashem generation. So we went into kindergarten in 1981, and we got a lot of FaceTime from the Rebbe, a lot for children. And after the Rebbe
So you grew up in Crown Heights. One second. You grew up in Crown Heights. So take us a step back.
Okay, so I grew up in Crown Heights. It may be hard for some of your listeners to imagine, but my family, my parents moved from Kew Gardens in 1977 to President between Kingston and Albany. At the time, we were the only white Jewish family on the block, on President between Kingston and Albany.
So between Kingston and Brooklyn was very Jewish.
Not either, actually.
Really?
No. As a matter of fact, my friend Shalom Raskin and I lived on President between Kingston and Brooklyn. The buses wouldn't come that far north on Kingston Avenue because there was no one there. Somehow Anash lived Montgomery, Crown. We had to hike down for a while to Montgomery Street to get a bus. I know
to go where?
To go to Yeshiva. We went to Ocean Parkway. And,
I see.
Yeah. Anyway, so just grew up in Crown Heights in the formative years in the 80s, which is a very interesting time in Lubavitch history.
Right. But that in itself is astonishing. I did not realize that Crown Heights you're talking the late 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's President Street and Carroll Street.
Yeah. It was a little bit of Anash didn't live there.
So there's 770, a few blocks of whoever.
Yeah, and then somehow most of Anash lived down there.
It's because the houses were too expensive on President Street?
No, you couldn't give them away in those days. Think about it. Yeah.
Wait, so it was dangerous to walk from Crown to 770?
Okay, so it's very interesting you should mention this because there was something very strategic that the Rebbe clearly thought about. The Rebbe wanted that building, which is now 1414, to be the dormitory for the Bachrim. Simply, I think, from a security perspective, that if you have Bachrim, able-bodied men on that corner, then you already have like a little outpost there. So there was 1414. It was an apartment building originally, and then they slowly, were able to slowly take over the building. That was a dormitory. So we were able to walk to Kingston Avenue because there was a dormitory there, but I never walked to Albany. You never walked the other way. That was no. Even to go to Carroll Street, it was
to Brooklyn, the same thing?
Brooklyn had, in those days, and Crown Heights had different problems because there were these stray dogs.
Seriously.
I think that people kind of left and they left their dogs. It was inner city that for lack of any better word.
President in Brooklyn was inner city.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah. I mean, the early '80s, it started, but that was somehow there was a gap. There's this gap, and sometimes, and by then it started picking up mid-mems. In any event.
And why did they feel so secure at Crown and Montgomery? I would just think that they would kind of congregate around 770.
I think,
or is that just how it turned out?
Okay, that's a good question. Perhaps because the houses on Montgomery and Crown have driveways or garage, like they have like space between them. Those row houses between Kingston and Albany was considered a minus then. So I think Anash weren't able to afford to live on President Street, originally because those are like more expensive houses. So they kind of got those houses, but that's a whole discussion.
That's beforehand. That's very interesting. I mean, it's hard to ask someone to remember how they looked at the world as a child, but especially if you're asking them in terms that are like adult terms. But I just find almost the incongruence so fascinating, where I know you want to go to the Tzivos Hashem, and we'll get to it in a moment. But on one hand, there's this kind of pastoral like nostalgic talk of Crown Heights. Okay. Back in the day, this idyllic time of the Gute Jahren, and you just called it the inner city.
It is adult though, in the sense that from my house to 770 was a safe corridor. So you go. My parents live a few.
I know, but you're describing safe corridors. That's
yeah. But it was idyllic because the Rebbe was there, and that was everything. So everything else was sort of like background noise. Didn't make a difference.
Is that really though the case? Because
at least that's the way I frame it now. Okay,
right.
So
right. That's what I'm trying to get to. I understand if it's like it's almost an impossible game to figure out what exactly you're feeling back then, but it's just at least even looking back, it's just at least interesting to point out that there is this almost contradiction in terms of like the vision that we have of it and then the reality, right? Even the way you just answered, even if I accept that on face value, like there's the neighborhood and then there's the Rebbe, right? In many ways, it kind of harkens back to how Lubavitch was back in Russia, where Lubavitch was this mud town that was full of blatte, right?
Right.
If you walked in and didn't know anything better, you'd be like, "What the heck? This place is another dump in backwater Russia." But for Lubavitchers, this was where the Rebbe lived.
Yeah, so it's interesting because of my parents are very unique, at least in those days, that they're both from families, and they lived in a frum community, and all their friends were moving from Crown Heights,
right?
And they moved to Crown Heights, and it's incredible that they did that, because I think the way the frum mind, if you look at the cross section of a frum mind, is like anyone that's firmer than me is like a religious extremist. Anyone less than me is like I don't know what.
Yes.
And they decided they want to like up it for their kids, and that certainly changed the trajectory of our family. So.
Oh, they didn't move out Lubavitchers?
Well, they were Lubavitch. My dad, it's a whole separate story. And some friends came to the first farbrengen in Tufshin Yud Aleph. My dad,
Your
yes.
dad was at the first Bosi Lgani.
Yeah, he was there with some friends. It's a whole separate story.
Where did you go to yeshiva?
He was at Yeshiva University.
Okay.
And some were, Rebberal Yunik primarily was teaching Tanya there. Before Tafshin Yud, actually, he was trying to get them to come. Something never happened. And then they read in the Tugmargan Journal that there's a new Rebbe. Wanted to see what's going on. And they showed up. A bunch of guys took the 3 train from up in Washington Heights and came in. Yeah. Anyway, so they consider themselves Lubavitch, consider themselves card-holding members of the Lubavitch community, but we had cousins that lived in Crown Heights, so they would come whenever they wanted to be here. But then my cousins moved from Crown Heights. Crown Heights, as you know, was just another from community. But slowly, everyone else kind of moved out, and they're like, "We don't have a place. We need to Crown Heights."
So your parents moved. So your parents were always affiliated with Lubavitchers, or they consider themselves Lubavitch.
Yeah.
But they still didn't live in Crown Heights.
Yeah.
They moved to Crown Heights as like a step in their Yiddishkeit.
Yeah.
Wasn't so much to be like next to the Rebbe, kind of, or that.
That's a great question. I think to be near the Rebbe too. I think to be near the Rebbe too, and yeah, it's interesting because I think, how different people see the Rebbe. I'm sure that's coming through in your podcast. Is that it's like a Rorschach test, a classic Rorschach test, where people, what do you see? I asked my dad, what did you see in the Rebbe, and he said, I see Yer Shemayim.
Really?
It's interesting, yeah, because my dad's Yer Shemayim. So he saw that in the Rebbe, and that was part. It's not that you just want to be holy or fromer. It was something they wanted to.
It's interesting. Dr. Seligson said the same thing.
Interesting.
I mean, I didn't speak to Dr. Seligson. Obviously, he passed away when I was 1 year old. But his son told me that who was on the podcast, he told me that his father would describe the farbrengen, the Rebbe's farbrengen, as a place where they speak Yanim of Yer Shemayim. And it's interesting because, like, a lot of Lubavitchers listened to that podcast, and a few had some interesting comments to make about that. They didn't like that very much.
Right.
They felt that like it was missing the point.
It's interesting.
Which I'm not sure that they're right, to be honest.
It's very interesting. I noticed something very interesting. It's my own little interesting thing that, like we mentioned before, the Rorschach test. You see what you see. So, different people see the Rebbe. You see the Rebbe through your own prism, and there's certain people that if you want to use colors as an example, we just have a certain colors that the naked eye can see. We didn't see infrared. We didn't see ultraviolet. Some people do, like someone like Dr. Seligson, like that. They see these things that most people don't see. I'm like, yeah, that's what I want.
Yeah, but that's an interesting thing. Your Shemaim is though what's right in front of you. I think everybody
For
sees
some,
I think everybody sees your Shemaim. I just think that like it's hard to see your Shemaim when you get carried away with everything else.
Enough to like take your whole family and move them somewhere. That's what I mean. I mean, you see.
I see what you're saying. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very interesting. So your parents are moving to Crown Heights for a very personal reason that few people outside Crown Heights can understand and few people inside Crown Heights can understand.
Right. And it's interesting also because both my parents have secular credentials. They went to school.
Right.
Crown Heights was an interesting time. Because we had 1414 on the corner, they would have, I don't know if the newer generation heard of Chapsam. There was always like people running, and it was a little bit like the Wild West, which is easy to sort of reframe it. But as you said before, it is what it is. It was a little frightening sometimes.
Look, I'm fascinated. You asked me what my epiphany in this podcast is. It's very hard for me to specify an epiphany, but the fascination that I have is the collective memory, right? In general, memory is a fascinating thing, but the collective memory is in a way like even more fascinating, even more complicated, where kind of everybody like buys in or invests in this collective memory, and it gets so like nobody has control over it anymore, and people just keep on putting stuff in, and nobody even knows what it is in a way. It's just kind of there, So like the collective memory of Lubavitch, what was it like? And like, obviously, the thing about memory is it's selective, right? And so there's, in many ways, to me at least, one of like the defining features of Lubavitch memory is that basically the Rebbe like moves everything out, like like there's no space for anything else, and
Do you mind to expand on that for a second? What do you mean? No room for anything else?
like even like in our conversation here,
Right.
how was it to live in Crown Heights when it was a dangerous or scary place? And it's like, well, the Rebbe was there, right? That's not an invasion of the answer. That's not. I don't feel that that's not being insincere. I don't feel that it's being insincere or trying to avoid the question, but it means that we're not like we in the memory we're just looking at the fact that Rebbe was there and like the fact that there was all kinds of shenanigans going around on the side, whatever.
Let me just tell you how I frame it, because I'm not trying to like paint it with a different brush. Is that I think the Rebbe's foreign policy of Eretz Yisrael and local policy is Jews don't back down. That was the story. Like everyone ran away and Jews don't back down. So it's not like I said there was no crime. I knew there was crime, but and everyone that myself and everyone you knew got knocked off their bike. But it was like, yeah, this is like Jews don't back down. It's like, yeah, we're here.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I understand that. But it's it's something that I want to talk to some people about. Also, is maybe you have something to say about it, but like the riots. That was the Crown Heights riots. I'm watching the documentary in the Wall Street Journal that came out a few months ago, and I'm like, to me, the craziest thing, and maybe because I'm just one track minded and I think the same thing, but maybe I am. Anyway, I'm watching and I'm like, this was during Nun Aleph and Beis, which, like, in Lubavitch kind of history is like the heyday of Mashiach, whatever. And it's like, what was that exactly? Like, how did those two things go together? And like, that to me is, but we have video evidence of those riots. We know they happened. It's just fascinating to me.
It's
like,
interesting.
What was it like to walk through the riot to the Rebbe's farbrengens where he's talking about Mashiach? You know what I mean? Like, what was that like?
Right.
That kind of like incongruence. That I think is what makes the memory.
Right. Okay. So first of all, we'll talk about what happened there. So that summer I was in the Morristown camp. We came back a little early. And I was there. We came back just in time for the riots, and I had box seats for that, for those events. So, just in Crown Heights, there was a lot of tension, and there's sort of like the racism industrial complex, if you'll call it that.
Sure.
So Al Sharpton would come around, and he was like a skilled acupuncturist. He would like touch all the pressure points.
Yeah.
Like he would touch this, that, like he knew how to get people. I think he's rebranded since, but he knew how to get like people riled up. And he came around and sort of, I remember him around for years, by the way. This sort of, when things came to a head. But the point is that, getting back to your question, is that Mashiach doesn't mean that everything's wonderful. Mashiach means that it's there's a crazy climate. There's a lot of there's weather. There's like a weather imperfections. It's crazy weather. So something crazy like that is Mashiach-esque, even though it's the inverse of it. But it somehow
feels Mashiach-esque.
It feels Mashiach-esque, yeah. In the same way, a hurricane or a tornado or something really far out.
So really, at the time when you saw the police on the horse, you're like, this is straight out of a movie, but it's also messianic.
No, it's interesting because those events didn't validate or invalidate anything else. It was like a sideshow. We didn't see that like Mashiach, and that's like didn't create any. It didn't validate, at least where I was hanging out, or invalidate anything that was going on. But you're right. During that period of time, the Rebbe spoke about Mashiach, that it's just within reach, and Mashiach is coming, and that was a very special time.
This week's episode is brought to you by This World is a Garden, a new film and concert production by Yuvla Media. Based on the Rebbe's first talk, Bosi Lgani, the production tells the story of the Chabad vision lasting over 300 years, to see this world as God sees it, as His garden. Combining beautiful cinematography with a live performance of a string quartet, This World is a Garden is a meditation on hope and holding on to a vision as time passes by. This production is now available to be shown at your Chabad house and community. Share the message and vision of Bosi Lgani with your community in a way you never have before. For more information, please visit thisworldisagarden.com. So how do you looking back? How do you kind of reconcile these different things? Looking back now, do you first of all do you agree with the way I'm framing it?
Anyone can frame it any way they wish. There isn't any wrong or right way to frame it.
I understand, but I'm saying,
But
am I off base?
no, no. I don't think anyone budgeted for extra innings gullus, like 30 years extra innings gullus. I don't think anybody budgeted for it. And I think that's, I'm sure you ask people in your podcast, like, yeah, how does that work into what the Rebbe said? But I will say this, that the Rebbe was always like eons ahead. There was always like a visionary, and the Rebbe's voice always got. You may describe it as a kol gadol v'lo yosef. It's like the Rebbe's voice is only getting louder, and the Rebbe's vision is when the Rebbe spoke then, he saw it now. That's how I see it. I don't see it like, oh, we're 30 years later, so I never have. No, I think the Rebbe was saying 30s. The Rebbe always thought 30 years later. More recent, it's interesting that there's a woman, Ruth Devora Wallen, and her whole inyan is that sikha that the Rebbe said in 1979 about meditation. About like the Rebbe said in 1979, and again, I don't know who heard it or didn't hear it, but it wasn't really famous, about different forms of meditation, using that as opposed to medication. So, so the Rebbe was a visionary, so he saw ahead, and so I see it as, yeah. So he sees now.
Well, I'm talking less about.
I don't feel like it was like a hit or miss.
I'm talking. I'm not talking so much about validating what the Rebbe was talking about. I'm talking about like looking back at that time from a ground perspective.
Right.
Like, how do you describe that time? Like, is there a tension there or conflict between the narrative? There's a narrative. There's a Mashiach narrative. There's a way of looking at those years as, the climax of this kind of Mashiach fervor, and I'm being very part with that.
Right.
And then at the same time, we're talking about the riots. It's just absolute insanity going on right at your doorstep. Or, like we were talking earlier in the conversation, the Lamids are these gute Zeiten, or the Mems of gute Zeiten in Lubavitch, and in the meantime, everybody's getting punched in the face on the way to 770. I mean, let me also put it this way: I'm in my 30s, and I didn't grow up in Crown Heights, but this is not a Crown Heights that was ever described to me, really. Okay. And if not, at least I'd never heard in these kind of definitive terms that that we had to put 14 here, so to make Crown Street to Eastern Parkway as a semi-safe walk.
Right. So, firstly, I don't, the Gute Zeiten for me, I don't look back with that nostalgic look at then. I know I've always framed it in that way. I know what was good. I know what wasn't good. And what's interesting, at least from myself and from my generation, is that, some people talk about the Rebbe and the Yuds, the Chas, the Lamids, and the Mems, the Nuns, and there's always, it seems, just to borrow from technicals, a different frequency, and each somehow the frequency gets a little shifted to here to there. I guess as we come closer to Mashiach, for me, until that point, in Aleph Nabeis, my whole experience by the Rebbe is like video without audio. That's an interesting thing, because I saw the Rebbe, I saw everything going on, but I didn't understand English, Yiddish, and even if whatever few words I understood, I didn't certainly understand the Teichen. So I was there, and I read farbrengens. I'm like, oh yeah. The Rebbe stood, the Rebbe done. Yeah, I got that. Yeah. I just didn't have the audio. So the first time at that age, is all of a sudden, I think they're clicking the connection. I get that word. I get that. So for me, it's not just those Mashiach sichos are not just a climax of years. It's just those are I entered.
Those are your years.
Entered that, and again, they're younger years. You're only Chav Zayin Adar was 15, so they're younger years. But these are the first and only sichos that I remember understanding at the time, and also
you did understand them.
I understood them. I understood them, and also.
Well, don't so many people say I mean, that's not a proof that
Right.
you're wrong, but many people say that they didn't understand what the Rebbe was saying in those years.
That's a good point too. So, okay, so it's interesting to mention this because the Rebbe, there was all these maimarim that the Rebbe would say, and then after Memches, the maimarim pretty much stopped. But one can make the argument that after Memches, every sikha was a maimar. It's something very, very esoteric. So can you understand it, don't understand it? Maybe I very well didn't understand it, but I remember, at least in my own mind understanding, some very basic level of pshat, and also after each sikha there was like a little huddle, and like at the farbrengen, and there was someone next to us, like the Rebbe said, and they were like talking, and then I would hang out.
During the niggin,
There was like a little huddle in our space. The Rebbe said this, the Rebbe said that, and there was like, and I was like, what about? Yeah, I thought that's what the Rebbe said, and yeah, that's what the Rebbe said. I was like sort of validating what I thought the Rebbe said. The Rebbe actually said. So 13, 14, 15 years old, but I think I get this. And then right after the farbrengen, there was a huddle there. Label Altain and the Vadlafatzich, and the group of guys just chazering the farbrengen until after Shabbos, when there was like an official chazara and everyone from around the world was listening. And so there were a few multiple layers of chazara, and I hung out at those. Like I was a young bacher. I wanted to be part of that sort of.
What was pulling you in? Was it the Yerushalayim? Was it the holiness? Was it just this is interesting stuff?
Okay, so I was afraid you would ask this. That's why I thought about this for the first time right before this podcast. I'll tell you what it is that our earliest memories of the Rebbe are from Tzivos Hashem. And you're like we're little kids, okay, like the smallest, like little things. And the Rebbe would walk into the room, and the Rebbe was so macro, just to the lack of any other word, like it would blow our systems, really, like all our circuits. So I see the Rebbe, like in those days it was Tzivos Hashem, and the Rebbe is the general of Tzivos Hashem. He's helping us get your Yetzer Hara in control and get yourself and the enemies, the Yetzer Hara and all this. But the Rebbe was always someone that, like, as much as you think you understand the Rebbe's eons ahead, and always try. So the Rebbe was always someone like that, like, have a lot of humility because there's a lot more that you don't understand. The Rebbe has before we get into Perek Yud of Tanya, the Rebbe is a tzaddik, and the Rebbe is the Nasi Adar. The Rebbe has an IQ that's eons ahead of yours, and an EQ eons ahead of yours. And whether you've divided, we look through the spectacles of Chabad, Chagas, or Nehem, executive skills. What way you cut it, he's like eons ahead. So I think it's like every time you learn a sikha, like if you're learning it right, it should blow your circuits. If it doesn't blow your circuits, then you have to read it again. So that's, for me, is like someone who's always blowing your circuits. That's my personal.
That's a fair answer. So when you would come to farbrengen, you simply were looking forward to this explosion of ideas.
You said, like, what's your high at the farbrengen, so to speak?
No. What's your angle? What's your angle? So
you also have to remember. Also, another thing I want to throw in is that
so some people have told me that they were by the farbrengen every week and they couldn't hear a word that the Rebbe said. Their place was far away. They had a hard time hearing, but they liked to see the Rebbe's kedusha. Right. Another person could say they liked the atmosphere. So
I'm very fortunate. I think my luck is that. So my brother Josh always had the best spot in the house.
Sounds like him.
Yes, so he was always up in the front. And my friends advised me. They said, if you show up on your 13th of farbrengen, you're gonna get like thrown out. But if you show up like this cute little kid without a hat, they're like, your Josh's kid little brother. Show up on your 11. My friends advised me, show up on your 11, you'll get the good spot. So I started showing up before I had a hat. It was like, okay, little kid. Then I sort of grew up. I got bigger. So I landed next to my brother, this awesome spot right across. You got great. You got the best. One of the perfect. In front of us are these Zakanim Center. You can't get any better than that, pretty much.
You were behind the old people.
In other words, in front of the Rebbe, but people are sitting. The first place that people are standing in front of the Rebbe.
I see, like where the TV would be in the like right up there.
TV.
I wasn't there, but
which TV?
In the weekday farbrengens, the TV would be right up there.
You're talking about the video in the front. Yeah, over there.
Right there, right after the tables.
Yeah, the TV was actually against the wall, but a little further up, right there. Yeah. So that I was lucky that I was able to get. So I wasn't in left field. I had as good as a seat and that's why I'm also fortunate. I also kind of, my brother had an amazing spot for Hakafas. that's how I was able. So for starters, I'm in the room. It's Shabbos, and even in the Alpha Base, I could hear the sichas. I could hear I got it. I'm there.
You could hear them.
Yeah.
And you felt like you were picking up ideas that were blowing your mind, basically.
I only thought of this now, and again, also you hear Tata. It's interesting because some people, when we were growing up, at least in Crown Heights, and again, everyone's in their own little place. I didn't hear the term Rebbe Tata. I know, and again, I'm not a mashpia, so I can't talk. We knew Rebbe Melech. The Rebbe's a Melech. You're just a good soldier. You're not coming for anything. Why do you ever ask someone like, why you going Mivtzayim? Like, because I'm going to get Ilham HaMid. No, you go because you're a good soldier. You go, you're a good soldier. You show up. You have and you want to be there. You want to be there, and we.
You felt it was a duty to be by farbrengen.
No, I never felt it was a duty to be there. Adarabba.
So what does it mean as a melech? As an obligation? As a duty?
Like a king. It's interesting because we talk about a mashal, but we don't have anything from reference with the king anyway. But at least the way I frame a king is a benevolent monarch.
Donald Trump's being inaugurated this week.
Right, exactly. So like a benevolent monarch. The Rebbe was a melech, and we always. And it's interesting because of Tzevus Hashem.
But what did you feel like you were coming? What did you feel? Duty?
No. You didn't think about it. You wanted to be there. It's interesting because one of my earliest memories is the Rebbe giving out Tanyas, Tavshim Mem Beis. After Yudolf Nissen, the Rebbe gave out Tanyas. Interesting, just a little story, anecdote here. So I was home. My mom was preparing for Pesach, and she's listening on the radio to the farbrengen, and I was home. And I kind of fell asleep, and I would listen to the farbrengen. Kids, you want to listen to the farbrengen. You didn't understand one word, but I camped out on the couch listening to the radio. And then my mother woke me up.
One second, paint the picture. So your mother couldn't be by the farbrengen. This is Yudolf Nissen.
Yeah.
It's a few days before Pesach.
Yeah, and she's cleaning. So the farbrengen.
Your father's at the farbrengen.
Actually, my dad was the simultaneous translator. My dad would translate. There are three translators. There's Rabbi Manas Friedman, who translates on cable TV in between the sichas. There's Rabbi Yankel Hecht, who's translating on the radio in between sichas. And my dad, if you ever see these people, like these transistor radios, people listening to farbrengen during farbrengen, my dad was the translator there.
Huh. So he was in 770. So
he was actually in the kollel. He had he had these headphones.
So he wouldn't even go to the farbrengen.
During the big weekday farbrengens, he wasn't on. He was in the kollel is it used to be the kollel right behind 770. Now it's like a construction site.
But he wasn't watching the Rebbe talk.
He had a little screen. He could watch from a live feed. It was like a little black and white TV thingy.
Wow,
yeah. So he wasn't there. So my
and your mother's 3 blocks away.
Yeah, and home preparing. And I remember my mom saying that the Rebbe was giving out Tanyas, and I remember the Rebbe was giving out Tanyas. It wasn't. We all loved the Rebbe, and it's interesting because it's interesting how things evolve. That I was.
Okay, but I don't mean to catch you. But is it a melech or is it love? What is it?
A benevolent monarch. People love their king. That's what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
So I want to just interesting thing. And when I never even thought it was a thing. When did I realize my flavor or my generation's flavor of that is after Gimel Tammuz, I was in yeshiva in London, and one of the shluchim was speaking he was farbrengen late at night. He's like, you guys, you don't have Ava for the Rebbe. And I was like, listen, again, I hadn't heard that. He was sort of.
When was this?
Tav Shin Hey. After Gimel Tammuz, a lot of us sort of flew the coop. Went to Israel, here, there. Yeah, we were from a generation that camped around the hospital. In any event, so we, and he's talking about, you guys don't have Ava for the Rebbe. Why not? Because you didn't do Chitas or study Ram. And I was thinking, Ma Kesher. And then I was like it's a religious thing. Of course, the Rebbe's, but we didn't see it like.
Wait 1 second. How did you know you didn't do chitas?
No, he was talking to some guy, whatever. Like you don't love Kawhi because you don't do chitas. I was thinking, like, since when would someone have to do chitas to love the Rebbe? Like, what's the connection? So it's, of course, the Rebbe is a religious figure, but I think that anyone who grew, again, I don't want to paint it like Crown Heights. I think anyone from that time is like, you love the Rebbe because you love the Rebbe, not. Of course, the Rebbe is Moshe Rabbeinu, but that's not the nature of loving the Rebbe because it's a religious figure.
So, how do you describe you were a subject of this monarchy?
How? So, where would I fit into this?
No, just I find this fascinating. I find this fascinating because you're saying it wasn't a father figure; it was a king figure, but it was like a benevolent king figure, which brings to mind, of course, Lahavdil. like a lot of people in England, the feeling they had towards the late Queen, like where they had this on one hand this like massive respect and but on the other hand there was love. Although over there it was also completely ceremonial and didn't cost anything. But
Right, but let me put it this way: Melech, not as opposed to anything else. So it's interesting. There's a sicha where the Rebbe speaks about Parsha Shoftim. Okay, he speaks about that the Rebbe is everything of the generation. He's the Navi, he's a Yoyetz, he's a Shofet, he's Mashiach, he's everything. So once upon a time, you had different people playing different positions. You had the Navi, you had the Melech, you had when Purim comes around, the Rebbe's Mordechai. When Hanukkah comes around, the Rebbe's the Rebbe is not so. The Rebbe is not Melech as a. I never saw that binary of father. It's just the Rebbe is someone who's way greater than. How's that?
so why did you want to come to Farbrengen? I hope I'm not putting you on
No,
the spot. You wanted to be there. You felt you had to be
I
there.
never felt I had to be there. And it's interesting because there were these concentric circles of people. So you had people in Farbrengen who were listening to the Farbrengen. I'm talking about weekday Farbrengens now, before Tafshin of Ches. Then you had a generation a little older than me, kids playing Kugelach in the front of the 770. Then you have like a whole ecosystem outside, the food truck and this. But the Rebbe is the epicenter of this. And again, you're a kid, so I haven't learned Chassidus. I haven't learned the Maimer. I haven't even heard of Chassidus Farbrengen. I remember like the run up to Dita Natzach, the Rebbe. I heard that there has to be a Chassidus Farbrengen. Never spoke of Chassidus Farbrengen. I was like, what does that mean? Like how do you like playing doctor? How do you Farbrengen? The Rebbe's the Farbrengen. I never heard of it. Like, what does that mean? Chassidus Farbrengen. Of course, Chassidus Farbrengen is the most very important, central thing. So these are formative years. But all I'm saying is that then it was like the Rebbe. Like a light, you turn like we just had in a Yom Yom. People are drawn to light. I hate borrowing these like. I want to throw something, and I heard that the Rebbe's brother, Yisrael Aryeh, that back in the day when their house in the Rebbe's home was sort of like a place of Beis Vada Chachamim, people come around talk about different ideas. The Rebbe's brother never used like the technical term like Malchus, these kind of terms, because like they become like thingified, they become like a thing. So like it's easy to like borrow like these prepackaged light, this, that. But one thing is that the Rebbe drew in people. The Rebbe was definitely the epicenter of everything.
Sounds almost like a kind of just like a vortex. It just pulls everybody in, and like it's just a force. Like it's just like a force of energy.
Yeah. I want to throw in an and or a but. Comes Gimel Tammuz, and then without getting into the whole, the emotional piece or trauma, or whatever, we'll just gloss over for the moment anyway. Is that the podcast is called Homesick for Lubavitch, and the question was I even home to be homesick? Because I was in the room, but I didn't understand any of those farbrengens, and I didn't, and I started studying my Marim, and I learned through all the Maimarim. I mean, anyone could do it. I mean, I'm not saying this, again, for religious reasons. We went through it. 30 years is a long time. You still have plenty of time to watch all the Westerns. It's a long time. And then I realized that I wasn't even there, in a sense, because, I was there. I got video of this, but I wasn't actually there. I don't think that, my Lubavitch now is not a continuation of that.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I actually discussed that with one of the guests. I think it was Bashevkin, that as a kid being away from home at a young age, he was asking me what that was like, and I said, in a way, more than the sadness or whatever kind of psychological things that happens to a kid's separation, whatever those things are. What I remember distinctly was the confusion, in the sense that, especially as I got older, I would leave home. I would think of home in a certain way, right. And then I would come back home and be like, wait a second, that's not what I remember.
Right.
And that's what I was talking earlier about, this collective memory. That's, in a way, that feeds this homesickness, in the sense that, we create this past. Right. And you're like, well, that past, I wasn't even there. like, I don't even know.
For me, it's neither here nor there.
In the sense, like, it didn't even happen. Like,
Right.
it's in a way very easy to conjure a past that all you don't need to live through it. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to.
Right.
It's just you just say it was there. You know.
Right.
It's very interesting. So you're saying that with time, the what you thought it was then has completely changed.
I don't see. I see them as two distinct things. I remember that, and there's this. It's not like ich gedenk the gute Zeiten, or I try to like massage anything to be anything or not. Those were wonderful, beautiful memories, and again, some of my earliest memories, which actually I didn't understand the lines, but I think I understood between the lines, affect me now. And I'll give you an example. It's not an example. One thing that I noticed. By the Rebbe as a kid. Again, I don't understand anything. We're in Crown Heights because we have all these wonderful cousins who live nearby, and they're all from. And like I go there for Shabbos, and the expression Yiddish, Kinder and Geld is a schöne Welt. It's like everything's wonderful there, everything's great. In Crown Heights and by the Rebbe, there's always a tension. There's always like a Libe Deig Bekirbai thing. Everyone's moving and running to farbrengens, coming from farbrengens. This is the kind of thing you notice as a kid. Like there's a lot of like tension and moving and going. So that's something I saw. And to me, even like after Gimel Tam was like all of a sudden, like it was all this time, like Shabbos afternoon. Like we used to run farbrengens. So I had to engineer something like that. I just felt like I got to do something. So every Shabbos I would walk to a shul, Makol Kehilas. You walk to a shul nearby. The Rebbe started a program. The Rebbe spoke about it in later years. Walk to a shul. So I like hustle down Remsen Avenue. It's raining. You're like, like you're moving. I always felt that. And again, it's not because I read anything later. That's because I remember that it's a more emotive. That like if you want to be on the Rebbe's frequency, you're moving.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I think I think it would do all of us a lot of good. In a way, I hate to sound even close to being an academic, because I think that's a way of like killing the soul of anything. Is try to like make. Well, I know your father's an academic. I'm not saying every academic, but a lot of times I go, let's what's call it? Let's get a sociologist on the case and like break it down into these completely arbitrary categories. And like just slice the frog a million different ways. I'm not suggesting that, but I think like something that you just mentioned, where there is the narratives, there are the feelings, things that are very up in the air, and then like you said, like just that movement, that physical movement that is very obvious that it was happening. It can be proven. It can in a way can be measured. I think there's something valuable about like. I'm not saying to dismiss narratives are very important, but I think it's also important to focus on real tangible things like that. Like what to be around the Rebbe, like the way you described to be around the Rebbe was to constantly move, to never be still. That's a very physical way of describing
physical
it.
Manifestation, and I could share another two little like sort of quick anecdotes which I thought of at the time, and then every once in a while I forgot about, but then I remember it once in a while. So as young, like little kids, we'd sit by the Rebbe's feet during farbrengens, and the Rebbe, it wasn't like in terms of it's not like it's a powerful, very powerful message. The Rebbe's not talking in a Shakespearean style with Machtim mit der Hand. But when you're a kid and you're under the table, you'd see the Rebbe's. You really saw it, like Frekt Rashi, and something the Rebbe would ask like a real Rashi Sikha, and there was so much going on under the table, and if you were standing down there, you wouldn't see it. The Rebbe was very restrained. He's very restrained. There's so much that the eye doesn't see, and that's something That's a
fascinating way. You see, but that's what I'm talking about.
This is a little perspective. Something else, which, and I obviously as a kid I didn't really put words, but something clicked, which in my little, something to that effect. It was a perspective for me. Was my mother was having tea with another woman in from the neighborhood who lived in she lived in the periphery of Crown Heights geographically. She lived in the periphery sociologically. She was like a single mother. And I was just kind of hanging around. And my mother asked her, how do you pay the rent? And she took out a personal check from the Rebbe, and she said, the Rebbe, he helps me.
Every month?
I don't know if it was 1 month, and I'm sure the Rebbe had lots of others. And I think as a kid, because the Rebbe was always talking about obviously Yisrael and this, and you do see it in without going, because again, I don't want to make this a comparative study in your youth where like, people say one thing and do another thing, some like stark examples, which is not relevant to go into. But to me, there was like, there was like a certain thing like Rebbe does this. He doesn't only, and again, I never thought otherwise, but it was like,
right.
It was that is just, these are like these three anecdotes are just like little anecdotes, but the gestalt of all this is that like the Rebbe, the Rebbe is someone that we're drawn to. That's it. Anyway. But again, not for this reason. Just it's part of the story.
Homesick for Lubavitch is brought to you by Yuvla Media, a boutique video production company servicing the Chabad and Jewish community. Since opening 10 years ago, Yuvla Media has pushed the boundaries of artistic and thoughtful storytelling in the community, with an insistence on there always being a memorable story as well as a beautiful and striking visual image that we believe is second to none. Over the years, we have worked with Chabad organizations around the country, as well as large organizations like Boni Olam, Torah Masora, and Atzalathon, guided by the belief that your story is absolutely worth telling with depth and creativity. If you are looking to tell your story with a video, please reach out to us at hello@yuvlamedia.com. Again, that is hello@yuvlamedia.com. A link can be found in the show notes. And now, back to the podcast. Yeah, but so I think, like, for example, those two different anecdotes that you gave, I'm not in any way saying one is better than the other, but I think it's important to notice the differences, especially in the way that we're talking about it here. Even the second one can be seen differently, but the first one was, to me, like a very kind of concrete, tangible description of food, of like what the Rebbe was like, but also how that manifested in the community. This constant sense of energy that like was like being very restrained, but almost like trying to explode out of its restraint. And so to me that's like something very real and concrete about that. And the next one is a lot more like
abstract
motivation, feelings.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying that
right.
I'm not discounting the second
Right.
one, but I think we focus so much on that category, right, and much less on like what was it like in a concrete, tangible sense. Describe it to me in a way that you can like prove, as opposed to expecting that I'm going to go along. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting because before we're talking about like a subjective Rebbe, and like I found this interesting. Pictures of the Rebbe. You walk into someone's house, it's usually a projection of their personal Rebbe. I've never. This right. I just took this off my parents' wall. I never been able to take a picture. There's like the Rebbe Tafshin and Beis and the Rebbe and the Lamas and the. Right. It's very and every like it's I don't know like who the Rebbe is. I know these stories of it makes a nice sound bite. And I didn't think about this years. It wasn't like the story, like you hear the story but like recently I was thinking about it. It kind of came to the surface. But I do get that like these like interesting anecdotes. I'll share another such anecdote about the Rebbe. Is that this is one of my favorite. Like this made a strong impression on me. A little anecdote is that I would ride my bike from my house to the corner and back, like about 30 feet, so back and forth. Anyway, because that was like the safe place to ride my bike. Anyway, and then I see a bacher coming out of 1414, and it was I don't know who he was. He's like he's wearing like his jacket, like his jacket over his shirt. And he has like a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And all of a sudden it looks like he's having like a seizure, like he's like shaking, and like something's not right, and like he drops the cigarette. I kind of found it funny. I just didn't know I was just laughing because I was nervous. I know what's flying, Then I just see the guy running for his life, like running, like north to 770. Then I look, and I see that the Rebbe's car is at the red light. And so I don't know, I don't remember who was driving the car, but the Rebbe was clearly there and was looking out the window. And it's interesting, even a kid, the Rebbe, it's like when the Rebbe's smiling, it's like a 20,000 watt, and when the Rebbe's not happy, you see it. It's like they're not happy, and the Rebbe was following him. And like years later, I sort of put the story together. It was a middle Seder. The Rebbe wasn't happy. He's not where he belongs. But what made more in this particular story more the impression is not the Rebbe was looking at him when I was there, because is that how this guy, like he walks out of 1440, whatever, and all of a sudden the Rebbe is like staring at him, not happy. Like the guy, like how much trauma is the guy? I don't know. I don't even remember who it was, but I just remember that scene. That made a big impression on me.
Huh. It's a cool story. Yeah, I like that kind of story. To be honest, I don't have a problem with the other kind of story.
Right.
I feel that for whatever reason, that kind of story has been preferred in a way to these kind of more what would be the word, like just down to earth. I'll tell you, if we're sharing anecdotes, although I don't have my own personal ones like you do, because I didn't grow up in that time. But there's this anecdote that really stuck with me. I heard it years ago by the Kinnis, or one of the Kinnosim, I think. I don't know if I was a Bacher. It was in the Altar Zal. They had like one year, or they had like a session in the Zal. Could be I was as a Bacher. I was just there. Right. And you look, Rabbi Krinsky was giving his address, and he shared this anecdote where he was once driving the Rebbe somewhere. I don't know if he was driving him into the city. I don't know if that makes sense, but he was driving him where the Rebbe could see that it did go to the city.
And it was weird, but it happened.
Right. So, yeah. So he was driving the Rebbe to a place where he got a view of the Twin Towers.
Right.
And I don't know if he pointed it out. He said there's the Twin Towers, or I'm guessing that's what happened. The Rebbe looks up from a sefer, looks at the Twin Towers, and Nisha Grace, and then looks back in the. And to me, I don't know, something about that kind of. I don't know, because that story doesn't ascribe, in a way, doesn't try to tell you greatness. It's a common rule in storytelling: show don't tell. The story that tells you what to feel, it washes right over you. But the story that shows that anecdote of the way you're just describing to me, the hands underneath the tablecloth.
Right. It's also interesting because we're talking about subjective views, and again, I try to the best of my ability to come with some level of humility. One thing I know is that I don't know. It's not gemach, I promise. It's like I realize there's so much more that I don't know, and I was reading Igris recently. And there's an interesting thing, at least in the early years, when someone sends a sefer to the Rebbe sends something on the book, like a comment, a correction. Anyway, this guy writes to the Rebbe, it's like really far out book, a few books, and the Rebbe comments is, this you write your book on comparing Judaism and Islam. It's like so far out. This that you say that Ramadan is like the 30 days of Tishrei, it doesn't add up because it's really 40 days. It's like it's the 30 days of Elul and the 10 days of Yom Kippur, till Yom Kippur, the 40 days. I was like, that's so interesting, so far out. Like we hear the sound bites, we wouldn't use the usual sound bites. Like I always try to feel and then there's a lot of levels, and a person can make a whole book. That's the Rebbe. That's not the Rebbe. That's just like one interesting thing. I want to share an interesting anecdote.
Share as many as you want, by the way. You've been granted permission as many as you want.
This was sort of also, I always knew this, but you never saw this, you know this and everyone knows this, but you saw a stark example of, you say tomato, I say tomato, and you see two shlachim who both chassidim, and they just saw things from a different perspective. One would appreciate Rebbe Melech, and the other one would appreciate Rebbe Tata, the other one would appreciate, It was the year after Mumbai, and there was this, I don't know how I landed there, but it was the same Sefer Torah, and then afterwards all the shluchim from that area, they were there. And the shliach tells a story that there was a that there was a shliach. He wanted to go to a balabas. He had a meeting with him, and he couldn't get a hold of the guy. Anyway, the guy's secretary calls him and says, "Yep, you have." The balabas is going to the game. He has box seats. You sit next to him, and as long as the game is going, you have his attention. So you go to the game. So the guy decides he's writing to the. I don't know if the story happened, but it's not relevant because
the story goes.
So the story goes, and then what's more relevant is how these two shliachim react to the story. Anyway, so he's not going to do anything. He's a shliach, and after the Rebbe, so he writes to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes, "I'm not telling you what to do, but so you know, like wherever you go, I'm with you." So. One shliach like Mishugana, Nepta some game or whatever. What's he even thinking of writing? What's even the Hava minute to go? Another shliach says, "No, I don't think so. I think what the Rebbe is telling him is that he should go, but he's not the guy sitting behind home plate, with dripping mustard and a hot dog and screaming, 'Play ball!' People see you come, you're shliach. They're not stupid. They know you're talking to the guy. Have your meeting with him." And in the middle of this, middle of the game with bases loaded, and he agreed to name the building. So you're ready to go and leave the game, and that's it. So it's not. And they're arguing. No, the Rebbe man does, and the other goes no. And everyone's these are both valid. I don't know. Now, not valid, but it's not for me. It's for Mashpia. But these are perspectives that people feel very strongly about. To their Rebbe would say, no way you're going to think that. Like, no. Rabbi Herson years ago when we were in Marston, he was talking about that he was. Similar concept that he was, he went to Balabas and he didn't realize he's in Atlantic City, and he says, I'm in a casino. I didn't realize that's where the meeting was, and he was the point is that like everyone has their way of looking at it, and it was interesting to see that Rorschach test.
Yeah, and I think that's why, in a way, it's very important to at least, maybe if not to completely get away from stories that automatically jump to things that cannot be proven. Or escape the concrete, to have a better vision of things that are more concrete and more fixed and more specific.
Right.
The goal is not to. If you go too far with that, then you're basically you're desiccating. You're drying it all up and trying to boil it all down to some data points that misses the point entirely. Your father, your sibling, your spouse is not a series of data points. There's a lot more to it, obviously, and that's what you need the stories for. That's what you need the narratives for. That's what you need the feelings for. But when it's only the feelings and only the narratives and only these abstractions, then you end up in a place where, like what you said, like, and to me, the hardest part about it is what you just talked about now, is that people still want to have the Rebbe, right? So everybody has their narrative, and then their narrative has to win, right? And so we go away from the concrete to the abstract, we go away from the concrete to the very like esoteric, and then we want to insist that our version of the esoteric is in fact the only version available, and that's cause of immense tension.
Okay, so what I try to do to deal with that, because it's a real and current problem, is to listen to a full farbrengen every week, at least one full farbrengen. Which, by the way, it's interesting because like Joe Rogan, he has like 2-3 hours, like people listening to long form. Once upon a time, you had to get in 30 seconds, which is a fascinating thing, which I think your podcast is awesome. People are listening to 2-3 hours. It's like a new thing. Our brains are being rewired. Everyone's listening 2-3 hours. To listen to 4 hour farbrengen, yeah, why not? So I'm listening to farbrengens, and then
when do you listen to it?
Okay, so in a perfect world, you listen with your gartel and your
say there,
going, coming, here, there, wherever.
You just like you have your AirPods, whatever.
Yeah. I can't get used to the AirPods because I'm like from the MEMS. I need like big, like these. I love these earphones. They're like llamas, MEMS. Like I have a big, like good.
So you walk around the city like this?
No, I can't understand. Yeah, so like in the house usually. I can't wear that. I don't know, some of those. And in any event, I'm listening to at least a farbrengen a week. So then it's like they're in alignment. You're more likely to get, because you can't retell yourself the same story because you're listening to a new story every week. You're listening to a new farbrengen, so it's like it's more likely. It's like an alignment. You could still hit and miss, but it's less like. I mean, you're at least stacking the deck in a way which you're more likely to do what what you're hearing, because it's not the same story like that you heard 40 years ago. And also in extra innings gullus, you get opportunity to learn other things. You listen, you're catching up, you're listening, you're and then that's so it's for me, whatever I think I understand is from recent study.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, so I've cut you off already a few times about Tivus Hashem. I apologize.
That's fine.
So let's go back. Let's go back to. I find it fascinating that Tivus Hashem was found, I think, in Mem Aleph, right?
Yeah.
Which means that a child born in the first year of Tivus Hashem turned bar mitzvah the year the Rebbe passed away. So I just violated my own rule where I ascribed meaning that I have no proof for whatsoever.
Well, actually, if you want to get technical, it's Mem Aleph. Well, okay, if you're born, then yeah. So we're a little older, yeah. Right. Yeah. So
I'm saying it was 13 years to.
But we weren't born there. We're just entering. We're old enough. It's interesting. We're old enough to understand what's fine. Interesting. The Rebbe Ben Chamish Lamikra is like he's a big deal. Like if you read the Rebbe's Rashi, when you read the Rebbe's Rashi Sichos, Chamish Mikra is not just like a kid. He's like Chachma and Tanya. The Alter Rebbe writes is like Kayachma. It's like perfect objective understanding. Not that our minds are developed, but like you can learn a new language when you're a kid. You can't do that. Yeah, at least I can't learn a new language now. So there's a certain objective, interesting molding happening in your understanding. The Rebbe was speaking to kids like that, and I think that's very interesting. I also, in my particular story, the Baal Tshuva movement started in the late 60s. So the Baalei Tshuva are now our teachers, which is very interesting because they're American. You had people like Alter Chassidim. I remember Basher Sasankin. I remember Mendel Fitzer would come for the high holidays. You see him around, but like there were in Crown Heights. Of course, there's Zayda. There's like Rabbi Afton. But I don't see myself in the same like.
He only came to Crown Heights later on.
But by the time I'm coming of age, yeah. So, but like American, like people, like I don't know, like we're from the same planet, and like their Hasidim and the Baalei Tshuva were fired up. They were fired up. They understood the assignment of army, and I think it was like it's interesting. Again, a Rorschach test because the Russians listen to every talking about the army. You hear like singing.
The Cossacks.
Yeah, like what is it called? The famous.
Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky and
you got to explain to Tchaikovsky to explain to you the madness of Russians. Tchaikovsky is, I think, the only composer of classical music to have cannons go off.
Talking about
one of his pieces. I mean, just the madness of that country.
Yeah, so there was
that was before the KGB, by the way.
So the siege of Leningrad, they had this big. And the American.
Wait, Tchaikovsky was by the siege of Leningrad.
No, I'm talking about there's a classical music. I think it's called Leningrad. They played it during the siege of Leningrad. All right, the Americans. They're thinking, as the army comes rolling, like they have that imagery, especially from that generation. There's like the U.S. Army is like that's our army, and you have the French constitution. They're thinking of like the Mirages. Everyone's thinking of their army. Okay,
so one second. How much of this is you projecting, and how much of it is like you can like actually describe?
So all I'm saying is that. I can say with absolute certainty, even though we're looking down, is that we saw is that our teachers who were teaching us about Tivus Hashem had a certain image of an army,
American,
like an American army, which is generals, a strong army, a powerful army
that wins
every time.
Vietnam.
No, Vietnam they won every battle, but they lost for political reasons. But America doesn't.
That sounds a little bit like Lubavitch.
No, it's not Revenge and You look it up.
No, that sounds a little bit like Lubavitch. Wins every battle, but
okay, fine. I wasn't going there. But my point is that these were people who were not just
optimistic,
or like mercenaries. You're a Rebbe, you show up. Like they were fired up. They themselves were like soldiers in Kabbalah's oil. And again, that's how we saw it. We had a teacher. I'll give you a name.
1 second, just to open up your idea. I think the word that would make most sense is patriotic. That's a very interesting word to introduce into the Lubavitch lexicon.
No, it wasn't patriotic. But
the American army. The whole idea is, at least like the kind of the mystique of the American army is that it was an army that was like the people's army,
right?
was a people's army. There were wars that they had to be drafted into, but it wasn't like this monarch that would throw. Like you could never get away in this country with throwing millions of kids at the cannons, right?
Right. All I can tell you that what I understood at the time was discipline. That's what I saw. I didn't see America. I saw discipline.
But why is that American and not Russian? I'm trying to understand.
I got carried away a little.
Okay.
So some hyperbole there, but the point is that
I liked where you were going.
Okay. But it's more, it's like discipline.
I see.
You see, like the Rebbe, every step is like the Rebbe is very disciplined.
So is there a particular teacher that you're thinking of?
Yes. So we had a teacher in second grade. He always comes up in every conversation, every meaningful conversation. His name was Rabbi Wasserman, Israel Wasserman. He passed away not long thereafter. And he had an indelible mark on myself, on my class. And I have an amazing class.
He taught Lubavitch Yeshiva.
He taught Lubavitch Yeshiva. And he was like to us, he decided that we're going to sing for the old Hajom nearby. And we would march down, because we're in the army, we had the army hats, and we would march down the Ocean Park. We were in Ocean Park Yeshiva. By the way, the famous picture of the Rebbe saluting is my brother Menachem Mendel, lives in Milwaukee. So we had the hat, the salute. There's very much part of like that Rebbe, because talking about a melech, but there's also that part of this discipline, and you're in an army, and there's like that piece. It's also interesting, by the way.
So he bought full into the whole Tzivos Hashem thing.
Who? Rabbi Wasserman? Yeah, So he made it a thing, and it was like, it's interesting because there was also a teacher, Rabbi Katzen.
Yes.
So Rabbi Katzen's interesting. Some people may not know this. He was our pre-1A teacher. So he was our teacher in Tashem and Beis.
He didn't teach in Alter, or that was only later
on? He taught in Lubavitch Yeshiva. When I was a child, he taught for many years. Okay. He was a chassid in the truest sense of the word.
Because I used to see him come to 770 with his boys every week. I thought that was Alter. Oh, no, you're right. Crown Street.
Yeah.
Crown Street. He taught on Crown Street, right?
Well, my taser was Ocean Park. It wasn't
I see.
Anyway, the point is that he made a whole song. He made a tape with basically like songs about Tzivos Hashem, but like the tunes were like to popular kindergarten preschool songs, like to the tune of and the song on na 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 na, like like these children, popular American children's songs. He wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wrote back something to the effect. There's a caveat out there, like it's highly, like it's something to the effect of like, we're not so sure if you can teach, even if the lyrics are Hasidic lyrics, to like elevate these children's songs that are not Jewish. So he worked on this whole recording. It just disappeared, and he wrote it, started again. He made another. So he was a chassid. That generation, and we saw that. There was Rabbi Ferris, who was now was a shliach, I think, in Berkeley. There was a whole generation.
He taught in Lubavitch Yeshiva.
He taught in Lubavitch Yeshiva. He was one class older than me. There's a whole generation of Bali Tshuva, and somehow no one told us that like you saw they were like soldiers. There was like that zeitgeist of being a soldier, and that during that time.
Was there at all this kind of like awareness that the teachers are now like? Was there any kind of pushback from the community?
It's interesting because I heard about him actually. So this is before my time, so it's I'm not an authority. These aren't my credentials, but I did hear about Rabbi Wasserman specifically. He married a woman from France. And Rabbi Goldberg from 770, Rabbi Goldberg from 770. So his father was from the original Bernois. You envision Reb Nissen.
Right.
And like the Rebbe was starting this, and again, they were Chassidim, okay? I don't know what was said or wasn't said, but the Rebbe was bringing in this generation, which was, the jury is still out who a bigger favor, because I think bringing in that generation of people with credentials, Americans, and who don't have the trauma of the Russian, or it did a lot for our community, tremendous amount. So I don't know what they said or didn't say, but when Rabbi Wasserman is marrying this French woman, and they had the Kabbalah's Panim in Bernois Yeshiva, and this first time they'd seen a Baal Tshuva they had heard about it, like beatniks or hippies or whatever, that generation. And Rabbi Wasserman chazered the mimer, and they were blown away. And he called his son, Rabbi Goldberg, from here, and he said, I'm beginning to understand what the Rebbe's doing over here. We didn't really understand what's happening, but he chazered a mimer like, as it's done. Anyway, since you asked.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, these are. I know you see them as anecdotes, but in many ways anecdotes are. They're very, very important. There's this distinction I once read. I think it's from C.S. Lewis. The difference between looking at the light or looking with the light. Right? You look at the light, you get blinded. You don't see anything. Almost ironically. But if you look with a light, where the light is shining, like on that spot of the floor, that suddenly it illuminates, right? And so a good author doesn't. If you want to describe, or a painter, you look at all the impressionist painters or all the painters. They don't draw sunlight like the sun. You can't draw the sun. Right. You draw the reflection of the light on the water or on the house, right? And the way that light dapples the leaves and so on. That to me is what anecdotes.
It's very interesting to mention this. The other day, I was reading I like reading the Rebbe's Igros from the early years.
Okay.
Because it's exhibit A of how to be a chassid. Because in those days, the Rebbe is pre-Rebbe. He's writing.
You're talking about the really early years.
Well, it's before Tafshin Yud Aleph. Okay, so the Rebbe is not technically Rebbe yet.
Right.
So as far as we know, and the point is, because the discussion before Hey Tevis, very interesting. It's a whole separate discussion. The Rebbe mentioned in a few of the farbrengens that by by David HaMelech, he crowned his son in his own lifetime. If the Rebbe throws that in a few different places, and you got to wonder if there was any discussion with the Rebbe and the Frierdiker Rebbe about being. It's a whole separate discussion, but I that's why I said it in the as far as we're concerned, we know the Rebbe became Rebbe. There weren't two Rebbes at the same time. Okay?
Right.
Point is that someone's writing to the Rebbe. So this is the early years, and it's Hendel Lieberman, right? So the artist.
My great uncle.
Ah, there you go.
Yeah, Mendel Futterfass's
brother.
Exactly.
There you go. Okay. So
my great uncle.
I'm sure you're familiar with the letter. I'm just for your listeners.
I'm not.
He was very depressed, clearly, and he
lost his wife and kids in the war.
Yeah. Anyone who was with Leningrad do that.
No, it wasn't Leningrad. Just so you know the story, Hendel Lieberman had a wife and two kids who were from Poland.
Okay.
Like the Poland that was close to Russia. Okay. And they went the summer of the war when no one was really expecting the war to break out. They went to visit family, and he didn't go along with them. Right. And then the war broke out, and they got stuck in Poland. Right. And so he ended up escaping with his family and the community to wherever, to Tashkent or Samarkand, whatever. But his family lost. So he was one of the only Russian Chassidim who lost his family in the Holocaust.
Interesting. I mean, horrible. I didn't mean interesting that way. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
The letter is written to, as is done in Igros, ... it's a personal letter and they don't have his name. But if you read the letter, it's clear there was only one such person that had, in those days, the Rebbe describes that he was an artist and he was in Lubavitch. Like that whole, he's clearly him.
Yeah.
So the Rebbe is talking about how artists see things from a different perspective. It's like a beautiful letter, how you see things from a different perspective. And that's what makes an artist, to see from that perspective. And if we can see something from that perspective, basically helping him work through which sort of what I can't even imagine trauma that he's experienced in his life, to put one foot forward.
He was an orphan as a small little boy. Right. His father passed away before his brother Mendel was born, during the pregnancy. So, and then he also he had his own journey beforehand. He left, he went to become an artist, he came back. I don't know exactly.
He draws very cool cats, by the way, like his cat with the. Every picture has a cat somewhere.
The painting I have of his in my living room, I don't think it has a cat. It has a bird. I find this art very haunting, in a way that I like, to be honest.
Like it's out of Isaac Bashevis Singer something. It's like something far out. It's like it has a
No,
certain.
but like even the ones like the painting I have is, I don't know if you're familiar, but it's the one with, there's like an old man playing a cello
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then a
yeah,
young boy
yeah.
playing a violin.
Yeah. You know
Um,
that one?
and even like on one hand, it's drawing a very like basic
Right,
scene,
right,
but at the same time, there's something in the old man's
right,
eyes and
right,
just the way that he draws a perspective of the people. Like, are
right,
they close or are they far to one
right.
another?
Just as recently, we had a poet Yoshua November was in our Chabad
He
house.
was the last guest on the
Oh, I
podcast.
saw that. I just hadn't had a chance to listen. We love him. Anyway,
Yeah.
good. Okay. So anyway, I asked him, and he was here. He was here, and I said, like, I realize there's something esoteric about the difference between every other yokel who thinks he's a poet and just tries to impose his poetry and you're like an authentic poet, which he clearly is. What's like? Is there any way to like quantify it or like the like he says like a real poem should make the hair stand on your neck. That's the way he put it.
Yes.
So you can't describe it, but you know it when you see it, type thing, right? So, yeah. So you're looking at it something very ostensibly simple, but it triggers you in certain ways, and you know it's art.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to kind of tie it back to the conversation, these anecdotes about the Rebbe, the anecdotes about Crown Heights, there's something about that too. And like, again, I'm not trying to downplay all the stories, the
Right,
so-called Rebbe
right,
stories, the
right,
miracle
right,
stories, or whatever it is. But I feel that when all the stories come saturated with obvious meaning
right,
and like
right,
purpose, like
right,
this is what the story is trying to
right,
tell you,
right.
it takes away that moment of connection that art gives you, where
Mm,
like, boom, I get it. Like this anecdote, this anecdote shows me something, and I feel it. The way Yeshua November described it to me is
mm,
being, not meaning,
mm,
right?
mm.
Right. Like too many times the stories have a lot of meaning attached to them, and less being.
Okay, as we're dancing around the subject, I would like to.
Go
I would like.
straight into it
So
then.
I'd like to borrow from a certain anecdote and just where I hold personally. The famous story with Rabbi Marash, the person comes to Rabbi Marash and he says he was offered this um, investment you can't lose. It's incredible. He's going to make money hand over fist. Rabbi Marash tells him, don't do it. Short story short is that he invests, he loses money, and he comes back to Rabbi Marash, and Rabbi Marash tells him that there's three, you should have listened to me. Why? There's three groups of people. When some people see I'm a tzaddik, you say they love my ruach hakodesh, so they listen to me. I tell them, you know what's going on from Shemayim. You know what's going on spiritually. You listen. Some people see me as a brilliant person, and some people they see me as the epicenter of the whole economy. So at least I know it's flying because someone's, people are coming for bracha. You're investing with this guy. I know he came to me 10 minutes ago and asked a bracha that he lost his money. My position is that the Rebbe's Tzaddik Yisrael Olam, and I see the Rebbe's Ruach HaKodesh and Moshe Rabbeinu of our time. Now, it doesn't preclude, it's not one or the other, it doesn't preclude everything else. I know that the Rebbe is eons ahead of me, so that's also interesting, but it didn't preclude that story.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
At the
Fair.
risk of stating the obvious, but I don't know if it would be obvious.
Fair.
Okay.
Fair. No. So I did make that disclaimer a few times. I'm not discounting the other stories,
Right.
but I do feel that those stories have been preferred. Like
Right.
they have been.
Right.
They have been pushed more. I'm not saying that it was somebody decided to do it and there's some
Right.
nefarious
Right.
agenda, but
Right.
for whatever reason,
Right.
that is the kind of preferred method of storytelling, where the story has an obvious meaning and the
Right.
story has this kind of
Right.
call to action in it, and,
Right.
and like, this is what the story is telling you,
Right.
and or this is what's saying about the Rebbe, this is what's saying about Crown Heights back then, whatever it is. And you end up putting meaning over the you put the abstract over the concrete. You put meaning over the being.
Right. Okay. So now that we got
I'm not saying that those
fine.
should go away.
I didn't think that. I just put that out there.
Yes.
And with that said, let's get back to this anecdotal stuff, which I love too. Okay. Cute story. It's anecdotal, but again, you see the Rebbe's personality, so to speak. There was he's still Baruch Hashem. He's the Baruch Hashem Chai V'Kayim. He's an A.B. Biederman, and he was, I think he was in the Koch administration, the mayor of New York, and he was by Yechidus by the Rebbe, and they were talking shop, I guess, about New York and about macro things, and he mentions to the Rebbe that my father made a shliach. My father made a shliach, so he just throws it in. Anyway, so the Rebbe says, "Oh, do you pay him shatchanas?" So he says, "Yeah," and he paid very handsome shatchanas. So the Rebbe told him something to the effect of, "If you knew how happy if you knew how happy you'd be, like now, would you have given, like how much did you give him?" He mentions a big number. If you knew how happy you'd be in your marriage, would you have given him like that? He says, "Well, you only give shatchanas." The Rebbe says, I think now you should really give him shatchanas because now you really appreciate how happy you are. So someone shows up at our front door, 20 years, married 20 years, and gives like another check to my dad, like a handsome check. So it's like the Rebbe's always thinking there's a Chabad piece, of course, very intellectual piece, and then there's a Chagas piece, but there's like a very kind, like piece always working how to help somebody. In a very, I know it's, again, I'm not going to build like a whole story. I thought it's an interesting anecdote, which I think people find interesting.
Yeah. I was just talking about it online with some people this week. That it came up in context with the infamous book by Heilman that's already years old. I'm not trying to bring up old to beat a dead horse, and I think it is a dead horse, but. Like that book, I remember reading it and I was like, I don't even care if it's factually correct. Like I don't know if you got the history right or wrong. The thesis makes no sense in the way that, here's this person who came and saw an opportunity to take over the Lubavitch Empire. Okay, first of all, the Lubavitch Empire didn't exist and people thought it was not going to exist. The Lubavitch Empire had no money. That's first of all, but second of all, like, do you know the cost that it comes with? Like, to be a Rebbe is to hear so many people's needs, and to even if God forbid you have a heart of stone, like you will, that is a weight you cannot carry. It's a superhuman weight to carry. And so I was saying to some guys, I was having a conversation online, where, like, for me sometimes, like you're talking about different ways of appreciating the Rebbe. Like for me sometimes a cornerstone of my appreciation for the Rebbe is like that, like just like the amount of sorrow that he listened to, and was a listening ear to so many people. And of course gave advice and helped them. But like that to me is, going back to this kind of objective, concrete, in a way that, I understand. I don't understand the whole world. I'm not trying to shrink the world to but this is what I got. You talk about tzidkus and tzaddik yisod elam. I could believe that, but it's not in my hands. You see what I'm saying?
I hear what you're saying, because it makes it also, we can apply it in our own life. There's a famous sikha where the Rebbe speaks about in the later years. Again, before you mentioned an Aleph and the Beis, one of the like sikhas which the Rebbe said, which was like hard to understand. It was like revolutionary. Every once in a while it comes up, but the Rebbe's Shana Rabbah, the Rebbe says that the Tzemach Tzedek had all his sons were called Rebbe.
Right.
And now every chassid could be a Rebbe. So it's like what's that? But perhaps
back then you were saying, what's that?
No, I don't remember it at the time. I didn't even remember it at the time. But someone mentioned it. I looked, it's there.
Yeah.
So idea is that we can do something like that. And that particular thing, the way at least I try to apply that, is like the Rebbe's listening to every single person. And when you're sitting with that person, with the Rebbe sitting with that person's the only person on the planet. There's no one else. You're the absolute center of the universe. And not only that, but when somehow many people feel this, that when you're walking by, you're passing the Rebbe by dollars, you're like, the Rebbe sees the best you, like your chida, the incorruptible you, not just you, but the best you, and only you. So I try to apply that when I visit people in the hospital. We have a few hospitals here. I'm very rarely there. There's Rabbi Rabbi Farbrengens, he's incredible. He's part of the Chabad of the Upper East Side. Rabbi Krasinski, they have a team of people. They visit people in the hospital. But invariably, every once in a while, I get called to visit people in the hospital. So when I go visit someone, before I go into the room, I just like Yechidus mode, like, it's not me anymore. You know, it doesn't make a difference what's going on or paying the bills or whatever. It's this person and only this person, and it's very, very, very. It's like when you hear you have to like do yechidus,
Right.
but it's just. But anyone could do this. So just they're taking these stories, applying them to how we would like to play Rebbe, so to speak.
Yeah. That does make it. The act of internalizing or trying to figure out how to internalize forces you to find that real concrete thing, and it might be different for you than for somebody else, but it does force you to get away from abstractions, right? It does force you to get away from easy kind of, oh, this is what it means, okay, but how are you going to translate it?
Interesting, mention this because
it's very easy. Oh, this is what it means for the world. Okay, fine, but how do you internalize it? Okay, now.
It's interesting you should mention this because Yud Shvat's coming up, and it's like the one. I don't want to use the word pet peeve, but I can't think of any other word at the moment.
This podcast is very hospitable to pet peeves.
Okay, the Rebbe's speaking about he's becoming Rebbe, Mazel Tov, and then he puts on the record something that he has a hard time with. He uses the expression "fegen lachem bozim."
Yeah,
you're sitting at a farbrengen. We'll call it liquid confidence of Chayim, taking over the world, and then that it's not translating into anything. You see, then the Rebbe has a problem with it. It clearly wasn't a new thing. You can conquer the universe at a farbrengen, and you're sitting around the table with like-minded people. But how does that translate into the real world? And the real world isn't the farbrengen.
right.
And the Rebbe's like, yeah, we have to figure out the executive piece.
Right, and I think a lot of that starts with. And I know I'm pushing something here. You want to, maybe there's a motivation there, but I am pushing a point. I don't have a reason in my mind why I'm pushing it, but because it's something that's really sticking out to me in this conversation. That like, if we look for the concrete, it might not be as. I'll give you an example that I think you'll appreciate. And back to this conversation of collective memory. And I don't think it's disrespectful to bring it up. I was working on a program many years ago when I was still working for Chabad. I was making stuff for Chabad houses, full time, and I made a program about the Rebbe's farbrengen, and I got access to some unique footage from Jem.
Archival footage.
Jem gave me access. It was all with permission. They gave me access to some very interesting footage. A lot of it hadn't been shown like in its full kind of, and like there was this footage, for example, of like the people in 770 before farbrengen and the Lameds, right? So everybody's kind of talking and then just kind of getting into their seats, and so you see the world before the farbrengen, which I always found I love context. Right, it's like the behind the scenes of the farbrengen, almost like what did 770 look like before? What did a Wednesday night in Crown Heights look like? What were people like before they ever walked in? Don't just show me the where they were all
reporting that, like Jimmy Breslin reports like a different angle from than the farbrengen.
It's just like it zooms out in time and gives me a little bit more context.
Okay.
Like what were they?
Right.
Well, it's not. It's.
Right.
I'm not talking about the perspective where you see behind the bleachers and people thumping around, which they also have video of, by the way. It's there, but people during the farbrengen doing whatever they were doing on the other side of the bleachers. But this is more just like zooming out in time, and it's like, don't start the story after they ever walked in. What's the story before? Like the people bull shoving and the older chassidim at the top. There's video. I could the older chassidim at the top kind of catching up and getting their places and getting ready. And there walks in, everybody's quiet. They told her I was walking in. Everybody's quiet. Everybody stands up, and then they have this amazing shot of like the shvil, and like the camera's in the shvil. Which for me, as like a guy who's never had their farbrengen, I was like, "Wow, I've never seen this before. This is what it was like to like see their like you see their walks like into the camera almost." And I remember, there was a, I'll say who it was. I was showing it to my grandfather, and he's looking at the video, And he's like, I don't like this video. I'm like, you don't like this video? He's like, yeah, this video isn't accurate. I didn't doctor this video. It's a video. He's
That's
looking at it.
awesome.
He's looking at it.
I
He's like,
admire that, by the way.
yeah. I'm not. As I
Fine,
said,
it's okay. Okay.
I think it's respectful to say the story. I usually hesitate to share, like, it's not
Right,
my story entirely, but I think it's respectful. It's not disrespectful. I'm like, what's wrong with the video? He's like, the shul was bigger. The shul was bigger. I'm like, Zadie, this is the video. I didn't touch it. This is what. Now, to be fair to him,
Yeah.
video does alter perspective,
Right.
and like that's how video creates the illusion of 3D. Is that the lines are kind of right. So, but what I took away from it is that he was at the farbrengen. He was at so many farbrengens, and the shvil to him was the world.
Right.
And the video puts it as like a part of a frame and makes it look so kind of.
Right.
And the reason I bring up that story is that a lot of times when we look at the anecdote as an anecdote and don't jump immediately to this larger meaning of it, it does feel a bit smaller, right? Like there is a little bit of discomfort of having a story that isn't game changing.
Right.
You know, the Rebbe looking at the World Trade Center or some of the other anecdotes you brought up. It's not that kind of Rebbe story, game changing story, but in a way that is the only way that we connect to something that's real. If we can only have stories that are saturated with our own meaning.
You're bringing up something also. Another.
I'm just trying to stir the pot here. By the way,
but I want to say that there's what they call the arum, which is certain things like you mentioned before farbrengen. I remember after farbrengen, the second the Rebbe would leave the room would become like in a moment like a cloud of smoke. They take out their cigarettes and like the whole room, like, and there's some that made a memory, and everyone going through the whole farbrengen. It was like there's some. It's funny because I didn't even think of it, but you mentioned the room of the farbrengen. You also, I remember as a kid in Tavshem Mem Aleph, the Rebbe came to 1440. The Rebbe after the Seder, the Rebbe, or on the way home, the Rebbe walked to different Sederim, and the Rebbe walked to 1414. They put a red carpet. I don't remember. There's a Yuman about it. The point is, I remember the carpet, and I remember everyone fussing about, the Rebbe coming to. So like there's certainly that piece of it, which again, not nostalgic, but it's part of the story, and I think we need to share the story because it's the story.
Yeah. I think anecdotes have tremendous value, and we don't we jump very often to the larger macro meaning,
right.
and
Right.
and you need anchors. You need things that you can relate to, and each person's going to relate to a different one. Is going to relate to it differently.
Right.
But this, I don't believe that reality is something to be scared of. You know what I mean? I don't believe like when it's real, it might be smaller in one sense.
Right.
That's the whole idea of Pneumius versus Makif.
Right.
You can get a lot more done Makivdik.
Right.
You can learn the whole.
Right.
You can learn the whole Shas Makivdik.
Right.
Okay, but what have you internalized?
Right. So, yeah, that's deep. Yeah.
I'm just teeing it off for you.
Yeah. It's interesting because I'm again myself, my generation came of age in that generation. I wasn't aware of the macro story. I hadn't seen shluchim. I knew very few shluchim actually.
Seen growing up in Karnataka.
I knew very few shluchim. It's interesting.
Yeah, there weren't that many.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mentioned this that in Tavshin Mem Daled, the Rebbe started Siyam Haram. The Rebbe started the Rambam, the study of Rambam every single day, and Rabbi Yisrael Darren, flew my dad out. At the time, the Darrens were shluchim in Springfield, Massachusetts. So he flew my dad out to be the guest speaker at the Siyam Rambam the following year in Tavshin Mem Hey. And it was my first time going to a shliach. It was.
Oh, you went along.
I tagged along, yeah. And I think my mom was supposed to go along for some technical reason. She didn't make it or whatever. There was another ticket. And anyway, I tagged along. Yes, you fly out of wherever we flew out of JFK. By the time you take off, you're already landing. But the whole idea is we're going someplace. The whole flight's like 20 minutes or something. Anyway, so we got there and like, I remember all the Rabbi Darren and all the Darren boys lined up like, how's the Rebbe? The first time I'd seen anything like that, it made a very big impression. I'm like, I'd never seen anyone who hadn't been in Crown Heights asking how the Rebbe was doing in the shliach. It was very, very, very interesting to me. And then I realized there's more to the story that I don't know, but I had never, like you talk about, the reason why I mention this is because the Rebbe's macro picture and the whole macro thing, I wasn't really aware of it till later on. I knew the Rebbe it's interesting, I was a counselor years in Worcester, Massachusetts. Herschel Fogelman, he's from the American Bachram, and it's interesting that just a parenthetical note here. And during the Free Rebbe's days, everyone moved around. It was like, Rabbi Hecht from New Haven. He was, there was Buffalo and there was Boston and there was Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Everyone's moving around. And then like the music stops. Yitzhvat, Tafshin, wherever you were is where you are forever. Anyway, Rabbi Fogelman.
That's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, because Rebbe says you were there to the degree, by the way.
Things get frozen in time.
Yeah, so at some point, Rabbi Hecht, Rabbi Yankel Hecht, everyone moved from East Flatbush, and he's like he came to the Rebbe. The Rebbe was like, the Shver sent you. They're like, there's nobody there. It's a kasha famai. So that's your shliach there in East Flatbush.
Wow, that's
interesting.
No, it's very interesting because there's a lot of that mentality today. But it's interesting to see how you said that's about Hari Kodesh, right?
Yes, interesting. Yeah, so Rabbi Fogelman would speak about, he was a chassid of the Friedrich Rebbe, and he was a chassid of the Rebbe, and he's in Worcester, Massachusetts. By the way, if you mention to the Fogelmans, it's a nice town. They get very bent out of shape. It's a city. Worcester's a city. So
I never heard it was nice.
In any event,
I'm kidding.
Exactly. So
not to mention it's spelled Worcester.
Yeah, exactly. I
insist on what's this Worcester nonsense? I don't.
Yeah.
How did Worcester turn to Worcester? It's really Worcester.
It's interesting how things evolve. My dad is from the Lower East Side. We mentioned Houston Street was because the immigrants didn't know how to pronounce it, Houston, but so it's called Houston.
But at least that's in the letters. Worcester doesn't.
Okay, then it goes back. I don't know how that evolved.
Anyway,
and in any event, he would speak about like he's describing, he's painting a picture. For those of your listeners who like trivia, he's describing like in the early Tashins, basically the Rebbe was running in from the subway. He was working in the Navy Yard, and he's like throwing on his gartel. For mincha he's a chiyuv. That sort of like, zeitgeist, that sort of space. The chizud the high alma, we'll call it. And there's a farbrengen, and the Rebbe speaking to the Bachrim, and the Rebbe speaking. Then the thing was Mesibah Shabbos. And the Rebbe says, "It's the Sadamas de Shabbos, der Nacht ben einem the ganze Welt." And so there were like a few guys sitting there. Like sometimes they had to schlep in a gatzenta. He said, "We had no idea what. They never heard this language before."
This is while the Rebbe was working in the Navy Yard.
That period of time. I know that I sort of put a few stories together, but that period of time.
Huh.
Yeah, and yeah, there was, and he's the ganze Welt. So the Rebbe was clearly, before we mentioned Tivus Hashem, the Rebbe started the 12 psukim in 76. The Rebbe would slowly break things in. The Rebbe's a visionary. He would think about things and slowly break things in, and there were phases, clearly. This is something the Rebbe was very much clearly thinking about. The ganze Welt. So, but again, as a kid, because we're talking about these, framing it through the big things, and now I never framed things at the time anyway through the big story, and I didn't know the big story. I was a kid in Crown Heights, and coming up showing what the farbrengens. But slowly, this story, I was beginning to see bigger story, beginning to get the story. The Kines HaShluchim was a big event in Crown Heights.
Yeah,
it was like but I wasn't from that.
Yeah. No, I also think that it probably also makes sense in a way now that I think about it. First of all, that you said it as like a throwaway comment about how like things froze in time in Tafshin Yud. I think that's a fascinating thing to explore.
That's, by the way, but I love reading the sichas from that period. You see the Rebbe and some things. The more things they change, the more they stay the same. He's writing to people in Kfar Chabad. The issues. It's very interesting, and you're like, oh, I see this.
Yeah. No, because also, somebody just wrote to me the other day, and it's not I think even someone said on the podcast, and I certainly heard it said before, whether on the podcast or off the podcast, this idea that, the Frierdiker Rebbe said, America's nicht anders, and then it seems like the Rebbe maybe believed that America's like gar anders, like the way that Lubavitch changed so much compared to previous. And I was thinking about it. I'm like, first of all, I can't accept it, not because I disagree with it philosophically. It doesn't work with my priors in the sense that the Rebbe took the Frierdiker Rebbe very, very seriously and very literally. Like and he said, who knows how many times that the Rebbe the Shver said that America's nicht anders. Like, there's no way of oh, well, really, he was just kind of paying lip service, but really he meant something else. It's like impossible to me. But going to this point that you mentioned earlier, it seems like there's this kind of I don't know if the word's paradoxical, but this kind of tandem of, on one hand, everything needs to freeze in time, like nothing can change, and only because you have such a stubborn anchor are you able to also radically change everything.
I love what you're touching. I love I love the can of worms you're opening up right now, because it's interesting. You see people who dress like the Rebbe and the Yuds. You see someone walking up Kingston Avenue and he's dressing. You see clearly that's what the vibe is looking for. Personally, what it seems to me, and again, my opinion at the risk of stating the obvious is as good as anyone else, is that the Rebbe is very current. So the equivalent of that guy dressing, so you came in with your white sneakers. Dressing with the white sneakers is the Rebbe dressing with the gray hat and tafshin yud, because it's current. It's current. That's what people wear. That's what people wear. So it's not like, I know the Rebbe, when the Rebbe told the artist, he said, draw someone in the cartoons for talks and tells like Dick Tracy. We're not drawing like Dick Tracy. It's not Hayyidal Rabim Atzev Koladeris. There's in order to be timeless, we need to be timely. That's what I'm saying. It's just timely. There's a time like Torah itself. It's the story and also there's another piece. Is that it's interesting. I was visiting somebody here nearby in the hospital. He had like an emotional event, and there's a place nearby. He was recovering from something, and he was telling me. He said, "The whole America is bipolar. Everybody." He said, "But in order to be here where I am right now, in the group of people who are recovering, you have to be at least tripolar." So that's the way he put it. And we're hearing the term bipolar less, and now we hear the term introduced, at least for me, and I hadn't heard it, but you hear it more often used, multipolar.
Yes.
So there's multipolar. That's how the whole Tanya is. It's like, okay, you have like all these forces working. You have a humidifier and a dehumidifier working in the same room at the same time, and all these forces, and there's tensions, and there's at the same time you have syntheses and also things which are odds with each other, and they all work together. It's like a perfect action, like a Swiss watch. There's like dials, lots of dials working in opposite directions, but the gestalt of it is a beautiful timepiece. So there's a lot of things happening, and they're not necessarily at odds with each other, but they're important to notice. So there's a timeliness, there's a timelessness, there's a piece which is very here and now. There's a piece which is an esoteric piece. You mentioned before Pnimius, you mentioned before Chatzonius, which is also important. I think the Rebbe bringing the crown out, Tafshin Lamed was like, trappings are important. Okay, we want a sefer that's a Yerushalayim, that's great, but we also want a nice crown. We want like this has to look nice.
Yeah, the watch is a very interesting metaphor. Like, watches today, of course, have like exploded in price, right. And it's very interesting how in a world of everything becoming commodified and like scaling, so like the in a way the allure of the watch, especially expensive watches, it's one of a kind or one of 10, and can only be made, even for all the money in the world, you have to get on a wait list. And why? Because the movements are super intricate, right? And it's all about, like you said, it's about how all the movements.
Actually, yeah, by the way, I'm a personal note, just to like, because we dug, like, we're like already in the deep section of the pool, to just to lighten it up a little bit. I have a gorgeous watch. One of my balabantim gave me, so I was sitting with my one of my balabantim, and like, we're having a nice conversation, some gab, some bullshit, whatever. He's looking at me, he's looking at his watch, and then like he throws a watch at me, like, it's yours. I was like, my eye. He says, it's better you than the EMS guy carrying me out when I go.
That's fine.
It's give interesting perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's,
But the way it comes together is what makes it so valuable, and what makes it so hard to put together in the first place. Like the fact it's not that everything, like it's precisely because all those things shouldn't work together, and yet they work together is what makes them so valuable, right? Like when we try to make everything so understand, like, oh yeah, of course, it's stimmt, alles stimmt. It's like, no, you're missing the point then. If it's stimming very easy,
right,
then you, like you said, if a sikh doesn't blow your mind, then you didn't learn it. If the Maimrim Malukit is the easiest, if you're grabbing the Malukit Maimrim off your shelf because you're looking for an easy read and you're not in the mood of the Rebbe Rashab,
right,
yeah, you're not really learning it.
It's interesting to bring this up because one of the ways that
it's
I
not
would like,
supposed to be easy,
right. One of the ways that I would like to think I'm evolving is listening to Rabbi Yoel. Because all the years I was always like, yeah, you listen to the Rebbe. Everything else is like background noise. And I was like, what am I? And then I was listening to Shir. I give a Tanya Shir, and I was like, oh my God, what planet have I been on? How did I miss this?
Right.
And I kind of got a little addicted. So there's the Kedas Moshe Yisrael, we call it. It's like the Rebbe, but there's also the Chassidim. We have to be on that train also. If a person is not on that train, that's a very important piece.
Yeah,
Chassidim, and that piece is like I'm embarrassed to say I only really like very recently.
But that's it. Well, Rabbi, but in general, that's in my view, that's the concrete, that's the more tangible, concrete part of Chassidus, of Chassidus. It's a very important, in some ways, just as important, or certainly crucial part. It's a non-negotiable part of it surviving. Because you, like, the Rebbe being a great man is a truth that doesn't depend on you, but whether or not someone cares about that in 100 years does depend on you, right? You could scream, you could tell a million stories about how the Rebbe was great. You could spend your whole life doing it, but if you don't manage to get someone to care about it, in 20 years or 30, 40 years, then it's all for waste. It's right. There's the macro and what's going on in heaven, but then there's also down to earth people relating to it.
So that's one of the dials in the whole story. That's Rabbi Yoel, and we're talking about also the Chassidim. And by the way, I should mention, when I was in yeshiva, without saying names, there was an older Rosh Yeshiva. He was from that Dvatsk Bachrim, and there was a newer Mashpia. He was very good, and we loved him. But the older Chassid from Dvatsk had it in for the new Mashpia. What was his issue? His issue that he's a young guy. The guy's showing that he was born in 1960 instead of being born in 1920. Right. And he had a heart. So there was a lot in Lubavitch now going on. Great stuff. There's a Mashpia Shmulik Shor. He's I don't know how old he is, but he's great. He's amazing. There's a new mashpiyim. So this myth of you have to have been there. No, it's they're on the right frequency. There's others like that. And also right now there's also a whole new thing that women studying not dressed in pink. It's authentic. Mrs. Rifki Slanim is
I understand.
Look, part of that.
Look. It's not just that. It has to be. It has to be that people today can have it because you're not going back in time.
Right.
You're not going back in time, and fighting with time is a futile and silly and a way very arrogant undertaking.
Right.
Time gets everybody, and this is where we live in. We live in this time and space. And we got to get real. We got to get real, and I do believe. I think it's a line that Elon Musk has been using a lot recently, and I love the line. His line is reality scales.
Mm.
Right? Reality scales. Like when you deal with reality and you work with reality, in other words, truth scales. Right? When it's real and you're not living in fantasias,
Right.
it takes over.
So as opposed to seeing Lubavitch as like something slowly pulling away, like you can make it go fast, the sunset, the sun slowly going, and you just slow it down till Mashiach comes. That's the perspective is that it's something timeless.
Right.
There's a power of the message of the Rebbe, and that is the frequency we want to be on. If someone was lucky to see the Rebbe, wonderful. If someone didn't see the Rebbe, maybe, perhaps, I'm sure others said this, is that like maybe in an interesting way, you're not framing it through your subjective thing, which you think you had it because you're just looking at it, the Rebbe who he is, which is Torah and the Chassidus, and of course I'm not.
But I still think
discounting
I still
everything else.
think the anecdotes. I think one of the things that people that grew up with the Rebbe when the Rebbe was alive, one of the things they took for granted was what you described very nicely tonight, which is, as a child, it comes to you in anecdotes and bits and pieces that kind of are digestible. You're not expected at 7 years old to get it. And then as you grow up, everybody knows, okay, when you be a bacher, you'll already come to farbrengens and you'll pick up the things, you'll grow into it. A lot of that has kind of shifted upside down today, where we want our kids to have what people used to wait till they're. And I'm not here now. I don't really agree with it, but whatever. It has its reasons. But at the very least, don't let go of the tangible anecdotes and things that used to be taken for granted, but are very, very important. We have to be grounded. I'm not scared of reality as a point, and I think that the beauty of the anecdotes that you shared and different things that we spoke about is that there's tremendous treasures to be found in what seems to be just basic reality as well.
It's interesting that in the in Tehillim, beginning of Tehillim, it speaks about it creates this can contrast between like this wicked person, Asher Shalech B'Chatayim and B'Der Chatayim of Moshev Leitzim, and then he talks about a righteous person, and it says there, Vayikate Shasal Apal Gamayim, it's like this tree which is sort of ensconced.
Right.
And then it says V'Halei Lo Yibo, and it's in addition to the fruit, like the leaves do not wither. So like the commentaries say there, like what's leaves? What is he saying? Like what's the? And the answer is that the Torah is the fruit, and then like this anecdotal stuff, all this trivia, or all this stuff is like it's also something. Is it a sideshow? Well, possibly, but it's part of the story.
Right. So anyway, thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful. It's been great.
Nice.
And,
thank you very much, and beautiful for bringing l'chaim.
The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentance Doors by Oren Sor Nadav Bachar and is used with their permission.